Hi there, everybody. Welcome to You and Your Brain Perimenopause Explained, the 9th webinar in the series devoted entirely to women and their brain health. I'm so excited to have you here today. We're going to have questions at the end, so make sure you have those prepared. But meantime, this is brought to you by Healthy Women Prevention in the Women's Alzheimer's Movement at Cleveland Clinic. My name is Tamsen Fadal. I'm a journalist, author, filmmaker, and proud menopause advocate. And while so many of us are familiar with menopause, when you've gone 12 months without a menstrual cycle, perimenopause is a natural process that occurs as a woman's body transitions to menopause. Well, I'm happy to be here today to discuss how this time can affect all aspects of a woman's health. Most importantly, we want to change a narrative, of course, on how this phase of a woman's life can be something to celebrate and talk about openly, which we certainly are going to do today. So we're going to talk with leading experts who are going to be discussing the symptoms associated with perimenopause, how these can impact a woman both mentally and physically, and also how to really embrace this stage of life. I'm super excited to bring on the doctors and the experts that we're going to be talking to today. So first up, Dr. Lisa Mosconi, an associate professor of neuroscience and neurology and radiology at Weill Cornell Medicine, and the director of the Women's Brain Initiative in the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic at Weill Cornell Medicine, New York-Presbyterian Hospital. A world-renowned neuroscientist with a PhD in neuroscience and nuclear medicine from the University of Florence in Italy, Dr. Mosconi was listed as one of the 17 most influential living female scientists by the Times. She is also the author of multiple books, including a 2024 bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, The Menopause Brain. Hi there, Dr. Mosconi. Good to see you.
Hi, honey. It's good to see you.
All right, we also have Dr. Jessica Shepard, a board-certified gynecologist and women's health expert specializing in menopausal health. She's the founder of Modern Meno Health and runs Sanctum Med and Wellness in Dallas, a holistic practice that has been featured in Self and Women's Health magazine. She's also a member of Healthy Women's Women's Health Advisory Council, and her upcoming book, Generation M, is going to further impact the menopause community, that's for sure. Hi there, Dr. Jessica Shepard. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right, rounding out the panel, welcome Jennifer Wise-Wolf. Jennifer serves as Executive Director of NYU Law's Birnbaum Women's Leadership Center. She also leads strategy at Ms. Magazine, dubbed the architect of the U.S. campaign to squash the tampon tax by Newsweek. Jennifer has presented at the White House and before Congress, as well as in state and municipal legislatures, working closely with domestic and global leaders in pursuing policy reforms. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Oh, it's great to have all of you here. Well, I know we have a lot to talk about. We're going to have questions to get to at the end, but I think the most important thing to kind of set things up is, we hear the word perimenopause a lot, but trying to understand exactly what that is versus menopause, where we know we've gone 12 months without a menstrual cycle. Dr. Shepard, I want to start with you. How is perimenopause different from menopause? Are we talking about the same symptoms? And at what age do women start experiencing these?
Yeah, I think age-wise, we can kind of categorize them a little bit differently because perimenopause is really what I kind of like to call the pre-game portion of a woman's life when they're getting ready or going towards that menopausal state, which you explained a little bit earlier, is when you've had 12 months consecutively with no cycle, no bleeding whatsoever. That is menopause. Now, what leads up to that is the perimenopausal phase, which is when you start to see some symptoms arise, whether they're frequent or whether they're just a little bit inconsistent, as well as bleeding, and your cycle may start to change as well. And what that signifies is really the dialing down of estrogen over the course, very slowly over the course of 3 to 7, maybe even 10 years before that menopausal phase. And that's what the perimenopausal phase is kind of that leading up into the menopause phase, which you can still exhibit some symptoms or not. And then you can also have some irregularities in bleeding or not until you get to that menopausal phase.
So there's so many questions. And then the loss of estrogen, of course, affects so many parts of the body, the heart, the lungs, the bones, just goes on and on.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of symptoms that occur. And I think one of the things that I hope that we can discuss throughout this webinar is that estrogen receptors are all over the body. And so, hormones, which estrogen is really a chemical messenger, and it kind of like is like a little postman, and it delivers mail every day. So as you start to have a decrease in estrogen, those messages are really not going to go to the brain and the heart and the bone as avidly and as much as they did before. And that's when you start to see some of those symptoms from an organ system perspective with the heart and the brain and the bone.
Right. Oh, so Lisa, I want to build off that last question of what we were talking about, especially brain. We know the brain is orchestrating this dance as it kind of slows down reproduction during perimenopause. So what exactly is going on inside the brain with this loss during menopause?
It's a really good question. And I think as a neuroscientist, it is important for me and for everybody to appreciate that the research is really just happening. Right? We had decades where no research was done on the menopause brain. And I'm really, really happy that now so many of my colleagues are also starting to look at menopausal status. It's a really important variable to consider for brain health. And there are more and more large studies that are coming out that are really providing the first-hand information that we need to understand how menopause impacts the brain. I always say that menopause is a neurologically active state, but what I'm actually talking about, to Jessica's point, is that perimenopause is the most neurologically active state, where the brain seems to be undergoing a transformation or a renovation project that leads or that kind of goes hand in hand with what the ovaries are experiencing, right? So the ovaries are closing down shop. And because the ovaries are deeply connected with our brains via the neuroendocrine system, then the brain is changing too in response to the change in estrogen levels, progesterone levels, testosterone input, as well, although that is not as well studied. What we have learned is that the brain undergoes a little bit of a remodeling where the structure or the architecture of the brain appears to be different after menopause than it was before. Brain energy levels are different after menopause than before. We're not looking at connectivity and blood flow and white matter hyperintensities and a lot of things that can happen to a brain. And everything I got my hands on is different after menopause than before. So my mentor, Dr. Robbie Brinton, who's a legend in this field, always says that postmenopausal women are operating on a complete new biology. And I think this is something really important and powerful because so many women experience that, right? And they go to the doctor saying, I'm not the same person I was, and my brain is working differently than it was, and I'm not crazy, I'm just different. And I love the science is coming to the rescue and validating what women have been saying for centuries.
And I think that hearing that from you and understanding that helps us to kind of at least say, okay, I'm not alone. There's not something, I'm not crazy. This is actually feeling very different. We talk a lot about what goes on with the loss of estrogen inside the brain, what goes on when we have different symptoms of menopause, hot flashes, one of the big ones, one of the very, very common ones. What is going on inside the brain, in the brain during a hot flash?
During a hot flash? Oh, we don't know. Whatever we know is from animal studies, it's from rodents. And what some studies have shown is that there is a change in electrical inputs in different parts of the brain that is likely associated with the fact that estrogen is declining. So I think what's important is to think of estrogen not only as a sex hormone, a reproductive hormone, but also as a brain hormone, especially an energizing hormone. And it's interesting, perhaps, to say that estrogen is to the brain what fuel is to a car.
Mm-hmm.
Because many parts of the brain, like Jessica was saying, contain estrogen receptors that estrogen activates, right? So estrogen is an activator. And when estrogen is not consistent, the concentrations are fluctuating, like in perimenopause. It can be high, it can be low, it can be all over the place, it can be bottomed out. Then the brain gets mixed signals.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica was saying with the little postman, right? They may or may not be carrying information correctly. Or think about it as a boyfriend who stops showing up. He either shows up too much or too little, right? And there's a response of slight panic sometimes. Maybe the estrogen receptors are like, wait a minute, what is happening? And when the message is not delivered as consistently, then some parts of the brain, including the hypothalamus that's involved in regulating body temperature, may be acting erratically as a result. And so the parts of your brain that's in charge of keeping your temperature steady, and they're being activated, overactivated, underactivated, then what may happen is that there are sudden bursts of heat or cold, right? There's also chills during perimenopause, which we talk about that. So this is what may be happening. We obviously need more research, but I would also like to say that there's a little bit of maybe miscommunication sometimes as to what hot flashes are or are not.
Yes.
Decades, physicians and scientists would say that hot flashes were just a quality of life issue, whereas now we are moving towards a more biologically meaningful definition where we understand that having many hot flashes, especially at night, may be actually not so healthy for your body and your brain. So it's something that needs to be taken seriously, not panicking over.
Yes.
Just we want to take them seriously from a medical and neurological perspective as well.
Can they be an indication, and Jessica, feel free to jump in here, but Lisa, can they be an indication of something more serious down the road?
It may be. So there's some indication, and I know Jessica agrees with this. I'm going to let you speak as well. So from the brain's perspective, there is an association between the number of hot flashes at night, the night sweats, and the number of white matter hyperintensities in the brain, right? So women who have a lot of night sweats tend to also have, at least in those studies, tend to also have more white matter hyperintensities. What are white matter hyperintensities, right? They are a sign that the white matter of the brain is getting punctured or slightly damaged in very specific spots. However, these are non-specific findings. So it doesn't mean you're losing your mind. It does not mean you're getting dementia. It does not mean you're having some other issue. It depends, and we need to investigate this more. However, for us in the dementia field, we do know that having a lot of white matter hyperintensities is a risk factor for vascular dementia. So it's something that we, again, just no need to panic, but it is something that needs to be screened for, diagnosed, assessed, monitored, and in some cases, not all cases, sometimes there needs to be intervention. Not for the hot flashes, for the white matter hyperintensities down the line. And Wes, would you like to elaborate more? I'm thinking.
Yeah, hot flashes and night sweats in particular are really those hallmark symptoms of menopause that women usually associate with perimenopause if they start then. But typically 2 to 3 years into the menopausal phase is really where you'll start to see those symptoms intensify. And so with hot flashes and night sweats, just like we were talking about from a brain health perspective, again, we have receptors for estrogen all over our body. So particularly with hot flashes, one, we do see from an ethnicity perspective that Black women tend to have more intense hot flashes and night sweats, and they also start that menopausal journey a little bit earlier than when we look at other ethnicities, as well as the duration. But the difference with what happens when you start to decrease estrogen is that impacts our vessels, specifically our arteries, and it really allows for more of the arteries to become thicker and stiffer. And then what in turn comes with that is when you have hot flashes, there are, studies that have linked it to a greater risk for high blood pressure and other cardiovascular risk factors, which can, again, increase your risk for heart disease, which we all know is the #1 killer of women. So really when we look at this, again, is to really make sure that we're taking the hormones out of the pelvis and realizing that hormones have such a great impact on all the other bodily systems and target organs in our body. And so for the heart, especially with heart disease being the #1 killer of women, we really need to realize that it's going to have an impact on the heart itself. And so we really want to make sure that people understand that everything is connected. So when we have a decrease in estrogen and we have that going towards our heart and our arteries, which are going to become stiffer. Then we're going to have hypertension, which is again going to increase your risk for heart disease. All these things matter. And when you start to see it really interplaying between not only the symptom, but what it's doing internally, I think that's really where we're going to gain some perspective in the community about how impactful that this menopausal transition is, not only on our symptoms, but on our bodies as well.
And also so grateful for that research that is happening, finally happening for women, and understanding how important it is as we continue to learn so many things. Jennifer, that brings me to you. You know, you wrote an article for Ms. Magazine that got a lot of attention, titled "Menopause is Fueling a Movement." So talk about what you meant by that. I feel like you know, a lot of women, if you're on social media, if you open the newspaper, you turn on the television, we're finally seeing the word menopause out there, a word that we've whispered before, we haven't mentioned before, we haven't talked about before, and it's kind of been shrouded in a lot of shame. What did you mean by that? And I guess more importantly, what does it mean for women in or on the brink of perimenopause?
Thanks so much for that. And I just have to say, listening to all of you, it's just always enlightening, and I'm so profoundly grateful. I'm the non-doctor in the room here. And yeah, I'm a policy advocate and I'm a writer. I'm actually holding up the magazine. So there it is, Menopause. We purposely crossed out is having a moment, which is often what the headline is, and shifted the discussion to it's fueling a movement. And what I meant by that was really it's these conversations and our health and the way we understand what's happening to our bodies is incredibly important, and it's something that I think we all know has been neglected in sort of the public discourse for decades, for sure. But the fueling a movement, I think, goes further than that, and it's to indicate that this issue in talking about perimenopause and menopause and how we take care of ourselves and how we ensure that we are our best selves physically, that we are our best selves as civic engagers, and that we are contributing to society as we're meant to through all decades of our life, is actually a political moment. It's actually a public policy opportunity. And so the having a moment, I don't mean to say that ever undermined the conversation, but it just sort of was like, oh, look at that. You know, we're able to talk about this now. It's way bigger than that. We're actually demanding that there be the kind of societal intervention and commitment to our bodies and our lives through all stages. And that ties to everything that Dr. Mosconi and Dr. Shepard talked about, the research that currently exists, the research that needs to be enhanced, what we know about menopause's impact on our bodies here and now, what it means for the long term in terms of our brain health, in terms of our heart health. Everything we know and we don't know, I would go so far as to say, has been a deliberate policy decision. And especially for the past several decades of lack of investment in this area, we are turning the table on that now and making the demands that are being met and are being answered. Folks may have seen that over the past just 9 months of this year, we've seen 4 bills introduced in Congress that tie to or demand better and more federally funded research, better and more education for us as consumers, for us as citizens, for the medical providers who treat us. We've seen an executive order signed by the President of the United States actually fueling the funding for some of those research demands. In fact, just yesterday, the First Lady and the President announced at the Clinton Global Initiative that yet another agency is contributing to that effort. The Department of Defense has now committed $500 million towards menopause research for women who've served, which ties to and adds to the funds that have already been committed. So fueling a movement is intended to sort of tap into every area of society that can have a stake in ensuring that menopause is not shrouded in secret, that it is not something that hinders us, and that it is something that actually enables us to be our strongest, best selves at this stage in our lives. And it's that call to action. So that's what was meant by the headline. That's what was meant by the article. And glad to talk more about all the policy that's on the horizon.
Well, I mean, it's so exciting, and I agree with you. It is that call to action that we're all seeing, that we're all here for every single day. it seems like we're finally starting to force some changes to take place. There's no question about that. But what are some of the challenges, I think, and victories that we're seeing from women, especially when it comes to the workplace? Because that is a conversation that we heard a little bit about, and I have seen a lot more conversation about that of late.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because the workplace has really shot out as the place that people are interested in seeing change. And in some ways, it's not surprising because, we are all people who rely on our careers for, part of our sense of self. It's our economic well-being. And the entire economy depends on our input. The Mayo Clinic had produced a study showing that thanks to menopause symptoms, as much as $1.8 billion is drained from our workforce because of untreated or unmanaged menopause symptoms and how that plays out for women in the workplace. So it's important on a lot of levels to be addressing it. I think what's challenging about it is that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution for what it means to manage perimenopause and menopause in the workplace. That presumes it's, an easily identifiable symptom for a finite amount of time that has a direct, response that can help manage it. So for a 40-year-old experiencing the first symptoms of perimenopause and a 52-year-old about to, become postmenopausal, their lives can look really different. Mm-hmm. And then add to that people's jobs look really different. Not everybody sits in a chair behind a computer. People stand behind a classroom. People stand behind a counter. They sit behind a bus wheel. There are many is an understatement. There's millions of ways we might go about addressing menopause to ensure a healthy, productive workforce. So one of the challenges is, kind of narrowing that down to a few best practices. And lots of folks have attempted to do so. In the Menopause Society just this past week put out a very robust, series of recommendations. Tamsen, I know you've written about it for Harvard Business Review. So there's a lot of really important guidelines, I think, that employers can heed to. But the challenge is that even if there's 10 or 20 or 100 good guidelines, there's millions of us. And I also want to make sure that when we do take advantage of menopause-friendly workplaces, and they're becoming more and more of them, that we're also protected from potential retaliation or discrimination. And that's really challenging because our laws right now are not set up in a way that ensures our protection. We have anti-discrimination laws that would protect on the basis of age or on the basis of sex. But there's nothing that actually puts that all in the pot and says, well, here's what happens when it's menopause, which, many employers can't even define or don't understand. And many employees aren't exactly sure what's happening and so it's messy, but we shouldn't be scared of messy. We're best at messy. This is what maybe we could say about women at this stage in our lives. We know how to handle it. So it's a mixed blessing, but exciting nonetheless. It's still part of what is a robust and full-throated policy environment, and the economy and the workplace shouldn't be neglected.
Lisa or Jessica, do you want to jump in on that one? Because I saw you both nodding, and I agree. We're not afraid of messy, but we do want to make sure that it works for women, not ever against them.
Oh, I think that, from, speaking from a healthcare provider perspective, just thinking of menopause as a topic alone, I think that we are still very early in the research, but also the tools, modalities, management plans that we have for women who are in the perimenopausal phase and the menopausal phase. So that kind of leaves this very large gap of how do we actually treat women who are walking into the office with these symptoms. And I think that that's where the research is going to help us, but also the relationship with a physician and their patient and the true understanding of what these symptoms are. And I think because we've limited to sometimes maybe the most common, maybe the top 4 or 5 symptoms of menopause, we know that there are such a broad category of menopausal symptoms, but they're not actually being linked to the actual menopausal experience when women come in and complain of them. So I think that there really needs to be this unroofing of what we understand as menopause in the space for two things. One, just at the time that someone presents with the symptom, but like Dr. Mosconi is doing, and a lot of other researchers are, is looking into the lifespan of what menopause can cause in the future. Because if we learn more about that, of what's going to be happen in the future based on this decline of estrogen, then we can start to be preventative early on in these women's lives, understanding the context of it. And I think we're very early in those stages, but I am optimistic that we're only going to get better at that.
Well, I want to stay with you there for a second, because I'm hearing a lot of women that are in their 30s now asking questions about lifestyle habits that they can start implementing to maybe improve their overall well-being during perimenopause. I find that super encouraging. On the flip side, are there any habits that could accelerate perimenopause? I don't know if that's a thing, but can you address both of those?
I would say maybe not accelerated in the sense of they'll have a longer perimenopausal phase before they actually get to menopause. And I do know that the research is going on when we look at the ovarian kind of longevity and how to prolong the ovary. But when we look at actually being preserve maybe our bodily systems in the context of, we know that the decline of estrogen is coming, that's where I think we can spend a lot of good time as far as lifestyle and what we can do, such as even we know sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass. We know that it occurs at an accelerated rate in your latter 30s into your early 40s. So what do we do? So we should be, again, looking at weight training differently and really emphasizing that early on than waiting till our muscle mass is gone and then we're kind of behind the eight ball, or changing our dietary needs, which change significantly in that time frame as well, and looking more at the protein of what we're doing in order to offset what we see with our insulin and sugar kind of in our glucose imbalances, which then is going to increase our adipose tissue. So there's a lot of little nuances that can be these small steps that we make every day from earlier on, so that we're not accelerating the progression of what happens when we start to decrease estrogen through our, our 40s, whether it's our early, mid, or late 40s, depending on when you kind of hit that perimenopausal, kind of peak, which is going to be different for every woman. But I do think we have to change that stigma of what menopause is, who it impacts, and how it impacts us. And many times we would push it off until I don't even have to worry about that till my 60s. And now I'm like, I want that conversation to happen in our mid to late 30s. So we start those differential changes in lifestyle and being ahead of the process rather than behind.
Treatment options that women should go in and actually discuss with their healthcare providers, if the healthcare providers are not bringing those up. Where do you become proactive in that? What do you ask for? What are the treatment options in perimenopause?
Yeah, the treatment options, which again has changed drastically, even from the time that I trained. We really used to only consider hormone replacement therapy until you were menopausal. So you had to prove that you had gone 12 months without a cycle before we would say, okay, now we can offer some HRT or MHT. And now we've really changed the concept of that and understanding. And I like to say, why do we wait till our tank is empty of hormones before we start to really fuel and fill that up and kind of keep it more at a steady level? Which is why we do start to look at our perimenopausal women differently now in giving them those options of hormone replacement therapy. And as much as, I just want to make, a claim that as much as a hormone advocate that I am, I also want women to know that if they choose not to take it, that's also their option as well. But we do know the benefits of hormones. And I think that because we're at this kind of crux of information where before we were like, no hormones, they're bad, and everyone used to run away from them. Now we're understanding the importance of them. We hear it much more that hormones are safe, which they are. But I do want women to know that it should be a very kind of robust conversation, and that they should understand for themselves individually what that means so that they can make the best decision for themselves.
Lisa, I want to ask you this. What have we learned from your research helping us when it comes to protecting ourselves from Alzheimer's or dementia down the road? Because I know that is a big question a lot of women have during this time, especially when they're dealing with brain fog, especially when they're feeling just not like themselves. And are there lifestyle changes or medications that can protect our brains throughout perimenopause as well?
That's like 5 questions.
That's like 5 of them.
So first of all, that's a really important question, because so many women, I work in Alzheimer's prevention, and we have so many women who do come to us because of brain fog. Right? The brain fog is this non-specific term that in clinical jargon is actually subjective cognitive decline or subjective cognitive impairment or even mental fatigue sometimes, that is still very much under investigation. But we do know that for some individuals that may be a precursor or a red flag for future dementia. So these are concerns that we need to take seriously, again, without panicking, without overworrying, but it does need to be assessed and investigated. And a lot of research in Alzheimer's prevention is really focused on understanding how sex and menopause status impact Alzheimer's risk in very young populations. We start when people are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, because that is when primary prevention can take place. And then when women are at the perimenopausal, postmenopausal stage, it's really important, in my opinion, to get, if you can, to get a baseline assessment. If you're concerned that if you have a family history of Alzheimer's, if you have genetic markers of Alzheimer's. And I'm going to give a huge shout out to WHAM, the Women Alzheimer's Movement, and Maria Schreiber for really supporting the research from a long time ago, where it was so hard to get fundings to really look into this. And their support has been pivotal for us to be able to generate new data like the brain oxygen imaging study that you're familiar with. And I'm going to tie it to brain fog immediately. So in July, thanks to WHAM and Maria Schreiber's support, we were able to publish the first brain estrogen imaging study ever, which I'm not bragging, I promise is true. It's the first time that...
You should be bragging about that.
No, never brag. To my knowledge, it's the first brain imaging study that looks at how the brain estrogen receptors, like Jessica was saying before, respond to the lack of estrogen. And we found there that if you measure estrogen in blood, there's no correlation with estrogen in brain. So you can do a hormone test from you can do a blood draw to measure hormones and predict whether or not somebody is going to develop brain fog. Mm-hmm. But the brain imaging is actually highly predictive of whether a woman has brain fog or not during menopause. So I think we're making good progress there to legitimize brain fog as an actual neurological problem that is associated with menopause by means of the estrogen declines and the brain response to it. So I just want to say that because WHAM has been really amazing. Their support has been amazing with us, and I really always talk about it whenever I can. Now, what are lifestyle things that you can do to lower your risk of dementia as an individual, especially as a woman? So what we've learned and what people are investigating more and more is that there seem to be different pathways towards Alzheimer's disease, where for men, the risks are more cardiovascular in nature, but for women, they're more hormonal and metabolic. So it's really important to look at metabolic health, hormonal health, as well as cardiovascular health, obviously, right? And things that can help, and Jessica already mentioned some of that, but a healthy diet, a balanced diet that is nutritious, that really provides like brain food, is helpful. And I know we can talk about that more later. But the key nutrients are whole foods, basically. Like try to minimize processed foods and to really get your nutrients from good quality ingredients. That's always a good first step. Exercise has been shown time and time again to be supportive of brain health overall and to be associated with a lower risk of Alzheimer's. Stress reduction is becoming at the forefront of Alzheimer's prevention, where more and more neurologists and scientists are actually practicing stress reduction themselves. So we all kind of meditate whenever we can. Sleep, I know it's hard, Yeah. What can you do? I mean, you can do it. Just try to practice good sleep hygiene and avoiding toxins. That is interesting. In the Alzheimer's prevention field, this is the latest and greatest, that environmental toxins can increase your risk of dementia. And they're everywhere. So, Jen, I think this is also becoming a public health issue. right? Because it's so hard to avoid the toxins, but we know that they're potentially harmful to us. So I wonder if there's some way to tie that to a bigger conversation that is not just about protecting women in the workforce, but also every day of our lives. I don't know. But so these are the big
Absolutely.
pillars of Alzheimer's prevention, I would say.
But it's interesting to see, as we add on, a lot of those things take us back to the basics, right? Of good sleep, exercise, whole foods, no toxins. But I feel like we spend,
Menopause assessment. We should
yes.
go to Jessica for assessment management.
No, I am like a staunch believer in, again, those small things that we can do in our life that can really impact, again, how internally your body can receive that, how it can function. And sometimes it sounds, a little hachi-machi or woo-woo, but there really is a significant amount of research behind lifestyle, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's things like even as you get older for balance and flexibility to help with yoga and tai chi, with acupuncture, and again with diet and exercise. And I really want to hone in on that diet and exercise part because many times it feels as if you are doing the right things, but sometimes we're not seeing the shift that needs to take place in those specific topics of exercise and diet. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's doing something wrong, but they may be unaware of the actual changes that need to occur in diet and exercise. And so that's what I stress a lot in these visits that I have with women going through this phase, and especially for the perimenopausal phase. I'm really trying to capture them in that kind of decade so that they can take that time frame to make the changes so that when they reach that menopausal phase, it really is now a lifestyle and a habit. And something that they've integrated into their life over time, rather than trying to say, okay, by tomorrow, I need you to change all these things because you're in menopause now.
Yeah, you don't want to have women walk out with this big to-do list of, although I feel like that's what we do. Okay, Jennifer, I want to ask one more question of you, and then we're going to get to audience questions as well. So if you have them, I'm seeing some, but keep them coming. We want women to understand with all the things that we're talking about, that this next chapter of our lives can be positive as long as we have the right tools in our hands or we're aware of the right information. What do you see, or what do you think we can do collectively to change the narrative around perimenopause for both women themselves, but also society as a whole?
I mean, it goes back to sort of these two key components, right? Having conversations like this in all areas, in the doctor's office, but in everywhere where women convene, is really, really important. The daylight that menopause and perimenopause has seen over the past few years, it will be the new normal going forward. And I think that is going to be game changing for many, many women. That said, we still have systemic failures, and Dr. Mosconi pointing to sort of the toxins in the environment is a really important one. It's not just, it's not just the individual decisions any one of us makes, but we are part of an entire fabric. And decisions have been made by those holding power that haven't always been in our best interests. And we surely see that playing out in many, many other areas of women's health. So part of the exciting moment to me that is positive is power, is the power that we hold as voters, as citizens, as people who can envision the future that we want for ourselves. And then to know that there are actual policies tied to these changes. Some seem really big and daunting, even referencing a presidential executive order. Maybe listeners are thinking, well, how do I take part in that? How do I raise my voice? But there are a lot of ways that every single one of us can be part of the system, the engine of change that we're all seeking. The first one, I said the word a couple minutes ago, and I just said voters, but please vote. Think about women's health. Think about all of the ways that we need leadership that is going to support women's health and respect women's health and invest in women's health going forward. Do your own homework and vote at the ballot box, please. But there are real life policy moments in front of us too. One state, Louisiana, just actually passed a new law this summer mandating insurance coverage, public and private, for all menopause hormone treatments or menopause treatments. We should have that in all 50 states. So that is a simple call you can make to your own state elected official that you want to see menopause as part of their agenda. And that includes being the vehicle to support research. It includes making sure menopause treatments are affordable and available and accessible. It includes other ways, again, that state leaders can be involved in the menopause discussion. Same is true for city leaders. Here in New York City, where I'm calling in from, we have an administration that chose to prioritize menopause in its own workplace and think about what kinds of benefits can be made available to city employees. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. It doesn't just include, Mr. Smith goes to Washington or marching up the steps of Congress. So that is sort of my rallying cry, and what I think is both a positive menopause positive experience, but a menopause powerful experience for all of us too.
No question at all. Such a great conversation so far. Thank you all. I know we do have some questions from our audience, so if you're up for it, we're gonna take a few of those if that's okay. The ones that are coming over. Well, I'll start with this one because I think this is one that I see a lot on social media for sure. There seem to be a lot of supplements out there for menopause. Are there any that could be helpful and or safe? I think those might be two separate questions, but I know that women see a lot of things, and I don't know that there's a all-in-one, cure for menopause. That pill has not been created yet, but there do seem to be a lot of supplements out there, and it can be confusing. Are there any that you would think would be helpful? And Jessica, Lisa, I'll let you both tackle that one.
Yeah, I think that there's a plethora of products out there, and you obviously see that when we started to talk more about menopause, it sometimes becomes a marketplace for a lot of people to have products. And again, a lot of them don't necessarily work. But I do think, my patients come in, I do look at the things that I know that do start to naturally decline in the menopausal phase and that are helpful. So for me, vitamin D is always something that I do recommend for my patients because I know that it is very critical in gut health. And I know that estrogen, again, here we go with estrogen having receptors in the gut. When you start to decrease estrogen over that perimenopausal, menopausal phase, a lot of women will say that they start to have, whether that's food insensitivities or differences in how their bowel functions. And a lot of that has to do with that now that menopause has decreased, the absorption of vitamin D is not going to be as good. And so it also helps with obviously your bone health and bone density, which we know significantly decreases because the estrogen receptors on bone are not being, again, emphasized or attached to because of the lack of estrogen. And the other one that I would say, and the other thing, the reason why I try to focus on as little as possible is because I have women who come in with about 10 bottles and they're like, which one of these should I take and which ones are important? And I say, for me, I want continuity and longevity with what you're taking. And this right now is a lot. And let's focus on a few that can really get you started. And those may change over time, but maybe if we just focus on 2 or 3 at a time, that's a little bit more sustainable than you taking 12 tablets a day. So with that being said, the other one that I particularly think is very helpful for women in the perimenopausal, menopausal phase is going to be magnesium. And the reason I think that magnesium, also just to know that there's different types of magnesium. So the ones that's really bioavailable in the sense that your body can actually absorb it is going to be your magnesium glycinate. Okay, because magnesium oxide has poor bioavailability. Again, so paying attention to what magnesium it is, but that's going to actually help with sleep. It does really help with sleep. It helps with mood symptoms, also digestive issues. And so I think that again is another thing that people can start with to kind of ease into this whole supplement world and seeing something that's very beneficial for them. And those are kind of like, I like to start light and I'm like, let's start with these two. Vitamin D and magnesium are kind of my go-tos. And then as they start to identify and personalize what their experience is, there may be some others that I may kind of drop in there, but I say sustainability and continuity is really where you want to be. And this is a lifestyle change, not an overnight change. Let's start slow.
Lisa, did you want to add anything in on that one?
Maybe thinking about brain health, right? There's a lot of people, like what Jessica was saying, we also have a lot of patients who come to the Alzheimer's prevention clinic with an arsenal of bottles and pills and supplements and whatnot. What we usually advocate is for a healthy diet. So try to get all your nutrients from your diet as best you can. And then supplements the nutrients that you're not getting from your diet. And it's my preference would be to test, right? Not over testing, just before anybody starts taking a number of supplements and whatnot. Let's make sure you need them, right? There are a few supplements that are indicated for general brain health support, especially for women who are past smokers or do not eat enough fresh veggies and fruits, which is common in this country. So antioxidants may be helpful to some, and omega-3 supplements. Yeah, I think I would add those two. But again, it is case by case. If you eat enough of certain foods, then you may not need the supplement. So it's important to maybe do like some dietary intake questionnaires, so to journal and see what you're actually eating. Because I find that a lot of people think that they're eating really healthily and enough for certain food groups. But when they write them down, they're like, maybe not. So that's also nice. Also, maybe just like fiber, right? I think also for menopause and gut health and whatnot, prebiotic, probiotics, fiber. It's always good to keep that on your list, but things to keep attention. I would say that, but I would also say we don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on supplements for menopause.
I feel like you both given me permission to go clean out that big cabinet I have. Those bottles, because I think I've gone to my doctor with them. I've taken a picture and I said, I've got all these. Which one should I take? And she said, which one do you take? And I'm like, I don't know. So, I'm with you.
I remember to.
I feel like I just freed up some space in my apartment.
Good. We're doing clutter. We're getting rid of the clutter.
Well, it's good for brain health to get rid of clutter. I know that. All right, Jennifer, let me direct this into you. As a CEO of a small company, someone asked, what are specific ways I can support women going through perimenopause?
Thank you so much for asking that. And there are some sort of basic 101 things that I think create a more open and equitable workplace. Ensuring that the health insurance plans that you provide cover menopause care and menopause treatments there. In addition to, I think people having a challenging time perhaps finding a physician who is going to be responsive to their needs. We've seen the rise of telehealth platforms and other ways that people are able to at least gain entry to menopause care. So ensuring that programs like that are part of the, the repertoire that you offer to your employees. There are a lot of recommendations about how to sort of create both, internal HR and open communication processes. And I think that looking into the Menopause Society's latest list of recommendations would be a smart way to create that kind of open communication, because I do think that depends somewhat on the workplace structure and what chains of management look like. So it's a little harder to give out, a quick recommendation about what those kinds of open channels of communication could look like. But doing that to the extent that it doesn't create, violations of people's privacy or other tensions in the workplace, balancing that, I know, is a real challenge. And then I think that there's public facing things that CEOs large and small can do, letting it be known that this is a priority in your workplace and that the goal of doing so is to create an equitable workplace that strives towards gender equity, which also means cleaning house in other ways. So it's one thing to have, menopause friendly policies, but to make sure that it really is something that your company is committed to through the course of people's lives. So that includes the kind of benefits and care that you ensure are available to people through all stages of their reproductive lives, including perimenopause and menopause. And then I think the last recommendation I would give is the workplace is just one slice of life. And we talked a little bit about why it's an important one. Is it the most important one? Not sure about that. And ways that CEOs can really leverage their influence is to make the case for the kinds of research and innovation that we know is so important. So being a strong voice in Washington, D.C., being a strong voice in the state where your company is headquartered or located, to make sure that, again, the state's policies align with the kind of menopause policies you're seeking to advance.
Mhm.
And especially if you're in industries that have specialty services that could be useful to this entire menopause movement. That includes PR, that includes tech, that includes AI, that includes a lot of ways that the private sector can be a good, responsible player when it comes to the future of menopause, and putting yourself out there and making those investments as well. So those are the short lists that come to mind quickly.
Right. Our next question is, can anxiety or changes in mental health be a sign of perimenopause?
Do I answer?
Yes.
Yeah, you go first and then I'll follow up.
I take the brain questions. Well, for many women, the transition to menopause is actually when they may experience anxiety or depression for the first time. For other women who've had the symptoms before, menopause may aggravate the symptoms or make them come back. So in other words, I think what's helpful is to think of menopause as an activator or a little bit of a trigger for whatever medical predisposition one woman may have. So if you experience anxiety or depression during puberty, or even more so during pregnancy or postpartum, then there's a chance that you may also experience anxiety or depression during menopause. So it kind of maps onto the natural history of mental health for some women, at least. It's not universal, of course. But yes, there is a connection that's been further investigated. Some people say there is no connection, that menopause is not even a thing, you're just a midlife woman. But I think what a lot of patients report and what a lot of research has shown is that these brain changes that can occur as a woman goes through menopause can impact not just cognition and cognitive health, but also mental health and mood, right? And this is something that I think we need to take seriously and do more research on, because so many women experience anxiety and depression as they go through menopause, and that needs to be addressed because the root cause, which is not the term I particularly love, but the reason for the symptoms may differ, right? There may be a hormonal depression, there may be a hormonal anxiety rather than serotonin-driven anxiety or depression, or some other kind of mechanistic explanation. So it's important to really tell them apart. And I think, what's missing at this point, and Jess, I'm calling on you for this as well. We do understand that there's a range of response when women are pregnant and during the postpartum depression, right? Where some women have no mood changes, some women experience the baby blues, some women have postpartum depression, which is finally a medically approved entity, and some women may even experience postpartum psychosis. So there's an understanding that there is a range of response. There is no such framework for menopause. And very bizarre, and we do need more nuances, and we need to formalize the full range of experiences that women do go through, because it's not fair to say these women have no depressive symptoms, therefore there's no impact on menopause and depression, or these women do have depressive symptoms, so menopause will definitely make you depressed, right? There's a range, and it's important to talk about that as well.
Yeah, there's a complete range of all the symptoms. When we bring it back to anxiety and or depression, and if we wanted to limit it to anxiety, a lot of that too also has to go with what that fluctuation looks like with our neurotransmitters, with our serotonin and our dopamine. But also from an emotional standpoint, a lot of women really have a disconnect going through this phase because their physical body, how they feel with symptoms, is this disconnect with, I don't even understand what's going on. No one ever alerted me to what is going on. It can be very disconcerting. And I think also too, with the dismissal of symptoms that women have had for decades, whether it be from society or healthcare providers, that can only potentiate this kind of cycle of overwhelm and not knowing what's going on, which can then breed more of an anxiety type of cycle. So I do think that there has been a lot of pushback on the actual feeling of what a woman goes through when they have these anxious moments or anxiety attacks. And so I think that it needs to, one, we need to do this in research, which I'm glad to hear of all these initiatives putting research into the menopause space. But that is one that I think, even with my patients, for a long time, it was very hard to kind of piece together where this anxiety is coming from and why they might be experiencing it differently than they ever had earlier in their life. And so, again, when we look at brain health and really looking at the fluctuations of neurotransmitters, but also the disconnect that women feel, I think that what we will see in the next few, hopefully 5 to 10, even 15 years, is that there is actually a connection that can be addressed, so then we can help our women even better as they go through these phases.
We have one last question. We've only got 4 minutes left, but I want to get this in because I think it's really important. It's for you. Does a lower estrogen during perimenopause increase the risk of Alzheimer's? And if so, how can women with a family history of the disease protect themselves?
Oh my goodness, this is 5 questions.
I know. You need another hour. Okay. I keep doing this to you, Lisa.
Does lower estrogen increase the risk of Alzheimer's? We don't know. What we do know is there is an association between menopause and Alzheimer's risk. The exact mechanisms are under investigation. And what we do know is that the risk of Alzheimer's disease increases in women after the menopause transition relative to women who are not in menopause at that point. And this seems to be an age-independent association, which this is the biggest pushback we always get, that whenever we show an association of menopause status with anything, people are like, it's just aging. Because when you're older, your risk of dementia is higher as compared to when you're younger, which is true. It's totally true. However, there is research showing that women who go through menopause earlier in life, at a younger age, are those who have the higher risk of dementia above women who are going through menopause. So that's why we're thinking, we know that estrogen is a neuroprotective hormone, and a lower lifetime estrogen exposure has been consistently associated with an increased risk of dementia. So I think it's important to understand that there is a connection. It needs to be better understood. In that case, this is the lower estrogen, right? In that case, then it will make sense to investigate hormone therapy, menopause hormone therapy for Alzheimer's risk reduction.
Okay.
And we have published what I believe is the largest meta-analysis on this topic at this point, where we were also able to break down studies into those that started estrogen early for midlife for menopause, and those that started estrogen later in life, like decades past menopause at the Women's Health Initiative. And if you compare them this way, there seems to be a protective effect of estrogen therapy, especially for women who go through menopause prematurely or because of surgical indications, so before the age of 45 or around the age of 45. More research is needed. We're doing it. Many people are doing it now. So I'm hoping that soon enough we'll have more data and better information.
So grateful for that. I so enjoyed our time together today. Thank you all so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you.
was amazing. Yeah.
I also want to say thank you to Healthy Women Prevention and Women's Alzheimer's Movement at Cleveland Clinic for bringing us together to talk about such an important topic. And if you want some more information, you can check out healthywomen.org, prevention.com, and women'salzheimersmovement.org. And I want to thank you, our audience, for watching, taking part, asking all the questions. And I hope you were helped out today and you all learned something very valuable about perimenopause.